Hi everyone, I'm happy to be joining the Earth Day 2022 virtual stage with Sam Perrin from Ducky. My name is Bonnie Wright. I'm an advocate for the environment, formerly an actress and turned director, and now author. And I'm very excited to be in this conversation together with you, Sam. Maybe just throw a little quick moment in about what Ducky is.
Yeah, thanks for joining me, Bonnie. I'm Sam Perrin. I'm formerly an ecologist. I now work for Ducky, which is a sustainability consultancy focused around the climate change crisis based here in Norway.
Excellent. And so recently, last month, the IPCC report came out, which is always quite an overwhelming day as everyone sort of digests that. So yeah, I want to know what your reflections are from that report.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the IPCC reports are never a swath of optimism, but there are always some silver linings if you look for them. And I guess the positive takeaways that I took from Working Group 2 summary was that they've really started focusing on what individuals can do, which I think is really helpful. It gives us a sense of empowerment that we can make a change. There were real focuses on advocating for climate literacy, so understanding the driving factors behind climate change, which I think your book does really well in its introduction, Bonnie, by the way. On top of that, there was more of a focus on awareness as well, and how increased awareness can really help us. There was, I think, a couple of paragraphs on the fact that heightened awareness can really help drive public movements and social movements to deal with climate change. And I think that's really encouraging that a major report co-signed by God knows how many climate scientists comes out and says, hey, we can do something as individuals. Of course, systemic change is important, but individual action can really help as well. So for me, that was really encouraging.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think also the literacy point, like you say, just the access to education around these topics. You know, I feel like I was definitely privileged enough to learn some of these things when I was growing up. But again, how do we share that kind of knowledge and that power within itself to empower individual action, like you say, which is very important. I think sometimes the reports can be these like big, overarching, overwhelming statistics that kind of don't relate to our lives in a day-to-day kind of micro scale. So it was good that was really pointed out. And I think, yeah, I mean, obviously talking about these big system changes, the climate crisis obviously requires these huge systemic changes that is kind of outlined a bit in the IPCC report by governments and industries. But also, as you point out, systemic change takes time. And like, what can we be doing as individuals, I think, within that time, because we're in it for deep time, but also there's like the daily reality of our time. And what do you think as individuals we can be doing? Because I definitely believe in the power of the individual action.
Yeah, and look, this is another fantastic thing from the IPCC report that I think, like you said, knowing what you can do really helps incentivize people and motivates them. And I would say that for a lot of people, there's some obvious changes that we can make, like not flying as much, changing our diets to be more sustainable. But there are certain things that anybody can do as well. So one of the key things is, if you live in a country where heating a house is a part of everyday life, then turning the temperature down 1 or 2 degrees can make a huge difference over the course of the year. If you're walking around in the middle of winter and your house is 24, 25 degrees, that may be a little too much. And just putting, socks and a sweater on, it may sound like something trivial, but it makes a huge difference over the course of the year. I think breaking social stigmas and organizing car shares as part of a kind of community effort is also an area where we can make a huge change in our transport footprint. So we talk a lot about electric cars, and electric cars have been have played a fantastic role in reducing our transport footprint. But what makes a bigger difference is just less people driving. And if we can organize car share groups throughout communities between people who own cars and don't own cars, then that reduces the number of kilometers driven in the year, and that makes a big difference. And there's a lot of talk about vegetarianism, but more so than that, just people eating less meat makes a huge difference. And not even that, just switching from red meats like beef to chicken 2-3 times a week over the course of a year makes a huge impact. And those are things that pretty much anybody can do. On a note that has a lot more to do with people's attitude, I also want to say that don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. There's a lot of things we can do. And I was going through your book yesterday, Bonnie. There is so much stuff in there. Even people just picking out 2 or 3 things that they can do as part of their everyday lives, whether that's cutting down on plastic, whether that's turning temperatures down, whether that's walking or biking instead of driving a car. Anything we can do now, anything we can willingly give up now, means that we have to sacrifice less later on. And those are huge steps forward. So anything you can do is worthwhile. And yeah, that's why on a purely selfish and subjective note, I am really, really happy with the work that we've been doing at Ducky over the last year, because so the habit tracker that you mentioned in Go Gently, that's essentially what we create on one level. We have a gamified habit tracker that we use as part of these organizational championships, where organizations or even schools compete against each other to save the most CO2 over the course of 2-4 weeks. And what that does is that it enables people not only to develop these really good habits, but it enables you to see exactly how much you're saving. And I think that that is a really important point, that we need to know and see that our actions do have results. So from the IPCC report to just the general ethos of individual action, I think that it's been really rewarding over the last year to be able to show people exactly what they're saving. And I think that more people taking that approach of just showing people the amount of change they can make is a really rewarding attitude.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in terms of like trackers and the organization of our time, we are definitely kind of a species that likes to see things kind of tangibly, I think. And that's why I think individual action is so important, because often these large, huge issues are quite unfathomable. But if we can tangibly make them relate to our life and see change, whether that's kind of deciding to, only compost your food scraps, like you will immediately see you probably taking your rubbish out, like, and your trash out, like way less frequently, because you're just lowering literally how much you're creating to send to landfills. So that's literally a thing you can see tangibly happening in front of your eyes, as you say, with like taking down the thermostat and just putting more clothes on. Like, it's cold this morning, and so I put, like a warm knitted jumper on. And you'll see that reflected obviously in people, your utility bill, and just simple things like that we do like to do as humans, see these kind of tangible, like realistic things in front of us. And I think leading on to my next question of just like optimism, for me, that makes me feel optimistic and hopeful, because I feel instantly more empowered by these intimate steps I take at home that aren't really for anyone else but my own kind of self and existence, and I'm not trying to do them to be kind of recognized by anyone other than kind of myself and maybe those I live with. But yeah, so with all this, like what do you feel optimistic about and hopeful about, and like how does that like channel into your work so that you keep kind of going?
Yeah, so the biggest cause of optimism, I think, over the last 3-4 years has been what we've seen from younger generations. People who have decided they're not going to let older generations, and I can't believe that I'm now part of that older generation to a certain extent, but my generation, my parents' generation, they're not letting our decisions dictate how they grow up in the world they grow up in. So that's been a huge cause of optimism. Now, where I think the real power of that comes is that those actions that the younger generation have taken with these ongoing climate strikes is that I hope it will inspire action in our generations. So you're on my generations, Bonnie, in our parents' generations. I hope that it cascades upwards, because of course we can't pin it on young people when we are still very much in positions to make changes to the world. And I think not pinning it on people is also a thing that we need to understand. we talk about individual action a lot, but of course that systemic change does need to be there. If you don't have affordable public transport, safe public transport, you can't expect people to take public transport. If there's no affordable housing near where people work, you can't expect people to bike or to walk into work. If renovating your houses to be more energy efficient or putting up solar panels isn't subsidized, you can't expect people to take out those actions and make their houses more energy efficient. And so that's the other part of the work that Ducky does, is map individual footprints across the whole of our nation and show governments where they need to help out and where they need to enable people to be more sustainable. And like I said, coming back to the IPCC report, it's a real marriage of the top down and bottom up approach. And this is the other big cause of optimism for me, is that we've seen schemes like this all over the world. So Italy has a scheme called the super bonus scheme, whereby they massively compensate for people's energy efficient renovations that they do to their houses. It's not perfect, but it's a real demonstration that when a government realizes that there's a risk, whether that's from climate change or the energy crisis, in the case of New Zealand halving public transport fees, they can put down money and they can make a change for the better, and they can save massive amounts of CO2 equivalents. Schemes like Oslo, so the capital of the city that I call the capital of the country that I call my home at the moment, Norway, they made the city center car free recently, and over the last 3-4 years it's turned into a completely different looking city center, and it's really incentivized people to take public transport, to walk and bike. I think the fact that there's young people making a difference, the fact that their attitude will cascade up through the generations, and that we're already seeing that marriage of bottom up and top down initiatives in certain parts of the world is fantastic. And I think that's real cause for optimism.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you say, all those examples of kind of policy working just shows, and again, as you've mentioned, the idea of the justice issue, the climate justice issue within all of this. Like, it's all very well having these great concepts and solutions, but until they're implemented in an accessible, kind of obtainable, affordable way for everyone, like what's, the real point.
Yeah.
So obviously the duality of individual and policy action. So yeah, there's so much that we can all be doing, and I'm excited for people to check Ducky out and to enjoy the other Earth Day things happening on this virtual stage. It's been lovely to talk, and it's always nice. I feel like the minute I hear people's optimism, I always feel even more optimistic to go through my day. So thank you.
That's really good to hear. Yeah, thanks, Bonnie.